It was 5:47 a.m. when the royal seal struck the parchment. The corridors of Buckingham Palace were silent, too silent. Outside, the sky was still heavy with the colour of night, the air thick with the weight of an unspoken truth. Guards stood motionless at their posts, unaware that within those gilded walls a decision was being made that would rewrite royal order itself. King Charles sat at his desk, the ink still wet on his trembling hand. His eyes, sunken from sleepless nights, carried a look of finality. "This ends now," he murmured, words not meant for history books, but for his own conscience. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Only 3 men witnessed it. His private secretary, stiff and pale, barely dared to breathe. The Archbishop of Canterbury clutched the document with reverence, though even he could feel the enormity of what had just been set in motion. And a young aide, barely out of training, watched in silent horror, knowing he was witnessing a moment that would never be publicly admitted but would change everything. Before them lay the paper marked EO. 7/43. Confidential Directive. Redistribution of Domestic Authority. A simple title for an act that would divide the monarchy itself. Camilla slept soundly at Clarence House, unaware that her influence, so carefully built, so fiercely guarded, was being stripped from her before dawn. For years, she had been the quiet power behind the throne, guiding decisions, shaping perception, stabilizing the fragile image of a family haunted by its past. Yet now, in the early light of morning, that legacy was dissolving in ink and silence. The order was written not in malice, but in exhaustion, an exhaustion that had eaten away at the king's patience, his health, and his heart. The document transferred authority to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, granting her oversight of ceremonial and administrative functions that once defined Camilla's public role. It was a move cloaked in vague legal language, but its meaning was unmistakable. Camilla's reign as Queen Consort, in all but title, was effectively over. The crown had shifted, not by death or abdication, but by decree. No announcement would be made, no statement would be issued. But already, the whispers had begun to circulate through the palace staff like wind through old corridors. Something had broken in the royal household. The tone of Charles's voice, the haste in his orders, the look of resignation in his eyes. It was not the behavior of a ruler enforcing law. It was the pain of a man making peace with betrayal. They said the order was constitutional. They said it was administrative. But those who knew the king's heart understood otherwise. This was not about politics. It was about trust, about love eroded by time and truth, about a man who had sacrificed everything to defend one woman, only to find solace in the quiet loyalty of another. The Archbishop bowed his head as the document was sealed, whispering a prayer that felt more like a lament. Outside, the first birds began to sing, their voices faint beneath the weight of the moment. In that fragile dawn, Charles exhaled, long, weary, and final. He had signed not only an order but a confession, and as the first light spilled through the palace windows, painting gold across the marble floor, a storm began to stir within the royal walls. Not of thunder or wind, but of consequence. But to understand why Charles would betray the woman he once defied the world to marry, we must go back just 48 hours earlier when the storm first began. 2 days before the order was signed, Buckingham Palace stood wrapped in a deceptive calm. To the outside world, everything seemed in order: the daily briefings, the quiet strolls, the official smiles. But within those historic walls, silence had turned dangerous. It wasn't peace, it was pressure. Behind closed doors, aides spoke in half whispers, conversations cut short when footsteps echoed. Phones were confiscated, access restricted. Even the royal press office, known for its poise under crisis, issued an odd no comment to every inquiry. Something was brewing, something so volatile that even the walls seemed to hold their breath. It began with a letter, a single, handwritten note that surfaced where it shouldn't have: Camilla's private chamber. Its existence was known only to a few, but its message was enough to ignite chaos. The letter referenced what she called plans for succession independence. A seemingly harmless phrase, but to the king, it carried the weight of betrayal. To him, it wasn't strategy, it was conspiracy. It hinted at a future where Camilla's influence would stand apart from his, where her family, her bloodline, might one day secure power beyond his own. The very idea cut deep, reopening wounds he had long tried to heal. Charles's reaction was not immediate fury, but a heavy, simmering disbelief. For years, he had fought to bring Camilla into acceptance, to rewrite history through forgiveness. And yet, here was evidence that perhaps his greatest act of love had turned into his gravest mistake. He summoned no aids. He issued no reprimands. Instead, he locked himself in his private chamber, reading and rereading the note as though the words might change if seen through tired eyes. But the palace is not a place where secrets stay buried. Within hours, a senior aide whispered the matter to Prince William. Shock turned to concern, and from concern to duty. When Catherine was told, her reaction was not one of triumph or vindication, it was heartbreak. She knew too well the pain of betrayal and the weight of duty. To see it unfold within her family again felt like history repeating itself, cruel and unrelenting. She didn't see an opportunity, she saw a tragedy forming. "He doesn't need vengeance," she murmured to William. "He needs truth." Meanwhile, Princess Anne, ever the quiet guardian of the monarchy's moral compass, requested a private audience with her brother. Those who were present later recalled her words, calm yet piercing. "End it before it consumes you." It was not advice, it was a warning. Anne had seen what internal wars could do to the royal image, and she feared another collapse, this time from within. As the day wore on, invisible lines began to form across the palace corridors. Aides, courtiers, and staff quietly chose sides. There were those who still believed in Camilla, the resilient woman who had stood by the king through storms of public hatred. And there were those who whispered of Catherine, the steady, graceful force the public adored, the embodiment of the monarchy's future. The divide wasn't spoken of, but it was felt in every exchange, every cautious glance, every word weighed before being spoken. By the time dusk fell over London, the stillness had thickened into something suffocating. No statements were released, no denials offered. But beneath the calm, suspicion spread like wildfire. Trust was dissolving faster than any royal decree could mend it. What began as silence had now become a storm waiting to break, and by sunset, that silence had turned into suspicion. And suspicion was about to ignite an all-out confrontation. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Instead, Clarence House erupted into chaos. The tension that had been brewing for days finally found its voice, and it was deafening. Servants hurried down corridors, their footsteps echoing off marble floors, desperate to avoid the storm unfolding behind closed doors. For the first time since the coronation, King Charles and Queen Camilla stood face to face not as husband and wife, but as adversaries. Words once spoken in affection now returned as accusations. What began as a discussion over protocol descended into an open confrontation that would fracture the crown at its core. Charles's voice trembled with fury. He accused Camilla of overstepping her influence, of allowing her family and advisors to blur the boundaries between her personal interests and royal responsibility. His words cut sharp and fast, years of suppressed frustration finding their release. "You've turned this into your court, not mine," he said, his tone low but venomous. For a moment, Camilla stood silent, then something in her broke. Her reply, calm but searing, filled the room like fire. "You made me queen," she said, "and now you want to make me silent?" The king froze. The sentence lingered in the air, a reminder that power in the monarchy was rarely shared equally. But Camilla wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her words unflinching. She accused him of listening too much to others, particularly to Catherine. "She's shaping how the world sees you," Camilla said sharply. "You don't even realize it." That accusation pierced deeper than any insult could. To Charles, it was a betrayal wrapped in paranoia, and for the first time, he raised his voice. He denied manipulation, but the very suggestion planted a seed of resentment that would soon grow beyond control. Aides outside the room could hear every word. Some claim they caught fragments enough to understand that the royal marriage had reached breaking point. The confrontation stretched on for nearly an hour, echoing through the halls of a house that had once symbolized unity. At one point, a vase shattered. At another, silence fell so suddenly it felt suffocating. Then came the sound of a door slamming, a single act that said what neither could anymore. Camilla gathered her things and left Clarence's house without another word, refusing to apologize, refusing even to look back. For Charles, the aftermath was unbearable. The anger that had driven him moments earlier dissolved into hollow stillness. He wandered through the room, papers scattered, memories lingering, and felt the enormity of what had just happened. There was no satisfaction, no victory. Only the awareness that something sacred had been irreversibly damaged. He called for no one. He issued no command. He simply stood there, realizing that love, when entangled with power, could destroy both. By nightfall, the palace staff had already begun whispering. Within hours, fragments of the argument reached palace journalists, distorted, but dangerous enough to threaten the monarchy's fragile image. By the time the first reports surfaced the next morning, Charles was already gone. He had left for Windsor under the cover of darkness, without announcement or escort. Alone, there, amid the silence of an ancient castle, the noise of his anger finally subsided. But what replaced it was far more dangerous: resolve. In the dim silence of Windsor's private study, the king sat surrounded by ghosts. The flicker of a desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, stretching over shelves of history, his ancestors watching him from their gilded frames with cold indifference. It was here, in this heavy solitude, that Charles met with the only advisor he could still trust: his own conscience. He had been betrayed, yes, but worse, he had betrayed himself. His heart had guided him where reason once ruled, and now he was paying the price. He had loved too deeply, trusted too easily, and compromised too much. The monarchy had endured scandal before, but never had its cracks been this personal, this intimate. He turned toward the window, his reflection merging with the night, and thought of the kings who came before him. Henry's defiance, Edward's abdication, George's silence. Each had fallen victim to the same truth, that love and power could not coexist without consequence. The royal historian, summoned quietly under the pretense of consultation, sat across from him, notebook closed, eyes steady. "Majesty," he said softly. "History only forgives those who act for the crown, not for the heart." Those words landed like a verdict. Charles nodded, but his gaze remained distant. He could almost hear his mother's voice in the echo of the room, a voice that never trembled, never faltered. Duty first. Always duty. And yet, there was Catherine, the one figure who, through the rising storm, had remained still, graceful, and unwavering. Not once had she spoken ill of Camilla. Not once had she sought to claim power or attention. Her silence had become her armor, her calm presence a quiet rebuke to the chaos around her. In Catherine, Charles saw what the monarchy was meant to be: measured, patient, dignified. The contrast between her restraint and Camilla's defiance was impossible to ignore. One was the past that had nearly destroyed him. The other, perhaps, the future that might yet save his legacy. The Archbishop arrived just after midnight, cloaked not in ceremony, but in secrecy. Their conversation was whispered and raw. They spoke not of law or precedent, but of morality, of whether a king had the right to protect the institution, even at the cost of his own marriage. The Archbishop's answer was simple. "Your Majesty, you must do what preserves the crown, not what comforts the man." The words struck deep. They weren't counsel, they were commandment. Hours later, a message arrived from Anne, hand-delivered by a trusted aide. The note was brief, written in her unshakable hand. "Do what's right, not what's easy." He read it once, then again. The decision, once clouded by emotion, began to take shape with ruthless clarity. It was about restoring control to a monarchy teetering on the edge of collapse. By 4 a.m., the draft of the emergency order lay before him. The pen trembled in his hand, but his resolve did not. He wasn't writing as a husband now. He was writing as a king. The words were cold, deliberate, final transfer of ceremonial and domestic authority, effective immediately. His heart ached with every line, yet his signature was steady. When dawn broke, so did the last of his hesitation. As the first light of morning touched Buckingham's walls, the king sat motionless before the document. The air was thick, unmoving, as if time itself refused to interfere with what was about to happen. He knew the ink he held would not merely stain paper, it would stain history. One stroke of the pen would shift power, perception, and destiny. For Charles, the decision no longer belonged to the man or the husband. It belonged to the monarch. And there was no choice left to make, only consequence. The clock on the mantel read 5:47 a.m. when the quill met parchment. The soft scratch of ink across the page was barely audible, yet in that sound lived the weight of generations. The official signing of Emergency Order 7/43 was over in moments, but its implications would echo far beyond those palace walls. The king's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the pen away, and those present, few in number but bound by duty, understood they were witnessing something that would never be spoken of publicly, yet would define the rest of his reign. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, sealing the decree with the royal crest, his expression unreadable. The document was delivered swiftly to the Privy Council, its contents marked "Classified Immediate." Inside its clauses lay a decision both delicate and devastating. For the first time in modern royal history, the name Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared as a designated authority in matters of domestic and ceremonial governance. It was not merely symbolic, it was power transferred by will, not inheritance. A quiet revolution, written in royal ink. Camilla's name, once attached to a long list of responsibilities, representation, patronages, and public duties, was now followed by a single chilling phrase: pending review. It was a suspension that needed no elaboration. Every word had been chosen to sound procedural, but behind the legal language lay personal heartbreak. For Charles, this was not an act of cruelty but of control, an attempt to reclaim what years of compromise had slowly eroded. Still, the moment he sealed the page, a flicker of pain crossed his face. Power might be transferable. Guilt was not. Witnesses later described him as visibly emotional, his lips moving silently as he stared at the signed order. Some said he was praying. Others believed he was whispering to the ghosts of the past, his mother perhaps, or the memory of promises made and broken. Whatever his words were, they carried the tone of farewell. A farewell not to Camilla alone, but to the man he once was, the man who believed love could stand equal to duty. When the Archbishop took the document away for archiving, the king remained seated, eyes fixed on the empty space where the paper had been. The silence around him was oppressive. Every decision in the monarchy came with a cost, but few left scars this deep. Outside, London began to stir the hum of cars, the morning chatter, the ordinary rhythm of life resuming. Yet inside those gilded halls, history had already changed. The order would remain secret for a time, guarded by those sworn to discretion. But secrets within palaces are like whispers in cathedrals, they travel faster than light. And though the ink was still drying, the storm it would unleash had already begun to move through the corridors of power. But the palace couldn't contain what the world was about to learn. When the news reached Catherine, she didn't celebrate, she froze. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words sounded distant, unreal, as if they belonged to another life, another world. She had never sought power, never wanted authority. Yet now, fate had placed the weight of the monarchy in her hands. Behind her calm smile and poised demeanour, her heart thundered with disbelief. Because Catherine understood what few dared to admit, this wasn't a reform, it was retribution. The transfer of power wasn't just a royal decision, It was personal vengeance sealed with a signature. She sat alone for a long time, processing what it meant. Her first instinct wasn't triumph, it was dread. Power was never a gift in the royal world. It was a burden wrapped in gold. When she finally spoke to Charles, her words were soft but resolute. "Please, reconsider," she pleaded. "Let time heal what anger has broken. Don't make this choice in sorrow." But the king had already crossed the threshold where reason ends and destiny begins. His voice, though gentle, was unyielding. "This isn't punishment, Catherine. It's preservation." She wanted to believe him, but his eyes told another story. One of exhaustion, pain, and something dangerously close to regret. William watched the moment unfold with the quiet torment of a man divided between duty and love. He was proud, how could he not be? Catherine had always embodied everything the monarchy needed: dignity, stability, compassion. Yet beneath that, pride was fear. He knew what came with sudden power, exposure, scrutiny, and danger. "They'll turn this into something it's not," he warned her, voice low, protective. "They'll say you wanted this." She shook her head. "Let them. I only care that we survive it." Within hours, the first ripple of consequences began to show. Public appearances were quietly cancelled without explanation. Official calendars were cleared. Behind palace doors, a subtle shift took place. The staff, those attuned to royal hierarchy like weather to wind, began addressing her differently. "Your Royal Grace." The title, though not official, carried weight. It was respect. It was reverence. And to Catherine, it was suffocating. The media, ever hungry for conflict, sensed a storm. Rumours spread faster than truth could catch up. Headlines hinted at a silent coup, speculating whether Catherine had orchestrated her rise from the shadows. She read none of it, but she didn't have to. The tension hung everywhere she went, the cautious glances, the strained smiles, the whispers that trailed behind her steps. What the world saw as elegance was, in truth, endurance. Late one evening, Catherine walked through Kensington Gardens in solitude. The world outside was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves. For the first time in days, she let the facade drop, allowing the weight of it all to settle on her shoulders. She had not chosen this path, yet it had chosen her, and in that stillness, she found her answer. "If I must carry this," she whispered to the cold night air, "I'll carry it with grace." But grace alone wouldn't be enough once Camilla returned to the palace. When Camilla returned, she was no longer a queen at peace, she was a woman betrayed. The warmth that once defined her presence had vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. Within hours of her arrival, the quiet halls of Clarence House buzzed with movement. Calls were made, favours were collected. Her network of allies in Parliament and the press, cultivated carefully over years, was awakened like a sleeping army. What began as whispers of discontent quickly evolved into a campaign of controlled chaos. Anonymous sources began leaking fragments of concern, each more damaging than the last. Headlines appeared overnight, questioning the king's judgment, hinting that the monarchy had become divided under indecision. And at the centre of it all stood Camilla, silent in public, but orchestrating every move behind closed doors. In her first statement since her disappearance, a brief and seemingly benign interview turned into a veiled act of defiance. "Loyalty," she said, with a faint smile that did not reach her eyes, "is earned, not transferred." The quote spread like wildfire, dissected, debated, and replayed across every major network. It was subtle, but the message was unmistakable. She had no intention of fading quietly into history. If Charles believed the order was final, Camilla was determined to prove that even kings could be outmaneuvered. Behind the palace walls, the tension grew unbearable. Legal advisors were summoned in haste as Camilla's supporters demanded a review of the king's authority to sign such an order without parliamentary oversight. Palace lawyers were pressured to find loopholes to argue that the document was advisory, not binding. It became a chess game played in shadows, where each move threatened to expose centuries of buried secrets. Every call, every briefing, every whisper added to the firestorm. And through it all, Charles remained silent, his health waning, his patience thinning. He had expected resistance, but not from the woman who once vowed to stand beside him through every trial. The monarchy itself began to fracture. The press painted two portraits of the same kingdom. On one side, the Queen's authority undermined, a crown in crisis. On the other, King Charles's decisive reform, a modern monarchy reborn. Each headline fed the flames of division. Within the family, lines were being drawn quietly. Anne stood beside her brother, calm and steadfast, reminding those around her that the crown's survival must come before loyalty to any individual. Her words carried the weight of history. The throne is not a marriage, it's a duty. But not everyone shared her view. William tried to intervene, desperate to stop the descent before it became irreversible. He met privately with both sides, hoping to restore peace between the two women who now represented opposing futures of the monarchy. But mediation, no matter how noble, could not mend what pride had already shattered. When the meeting ended, his silence said more than any words could. He knew the war had already been lost. Days later, a private encounter between Camilla and Catherine took place in the palace. No aides, no audience. What transpired remains one of the most closely guarded moments in modern royal history. Those close to both women described it only as cold, dignified, and devastating. There were no raised voices, only truths spoken too late. Catherine left the room pale and composed, while Camilla's expression was unreadable victory and heartbreak intertwined. The royal family had survived scandals before, but never one that cut this deep, never one that turned the heart of the monarchy against itself. Old wounds had reopened, and for the first time in decades, the echo of the past returned with haunting clarity. The monarchy hadn't seen a fracture this deep since Diana and the ghosts of that tragedy were about to return. By week's end, the world knew everything, or thought it did. The media feasted on the story like vultures circling a wounded crown. Headlines screamed of betrayal, rebellion, and royal collapse. Every network carried a version of events. Every pundit had an opinion. The monarchy, an institution built on silence, had become the loudest story on earth. Yet behind those palace gates, beneath the noise and speculation, one final revelation was waiting. A secret not meant for headlines, but for history. It came not through leaks or whispers, but from a sealed envelope hidden deep within the king's private archives, a letter written months earlier by the late Queen Elizabeth herself. The letter was brief, written in her unmistakably steady hand. It carried no official seal, only a simple signature. Elizabeth R. Its message was both intimate and prophetic. "There will come a time," she wrote, "when the crown must find balance between endurance and empathy. And when that time arrives, it may be Catherine's strength that steadies the throne." The king read those words again and again, the weight of them pressing into his soul. It was as though his mother had spoken across time, reminding him that monarchy was not built on sentiment but on faith, and perhaps this was her way of granting him divine permission to act. Charles, for all his pain and turmoil, found in that letter a clarity that had eluded him for weeks. The guilt that had gnawed at him softened. He no longer saw his decision as betrayal, but as fulfillment, an act not of rebellion, but of responsibility. To him, it was not about replacing one queen with another, it was about ensuring the crown's survival. That letter became his unspoken justification, the unseen force behind every public silence and every private tear. As fragments of the truth began to surface, public sentiment began to shift. The same crowd that once pitied Camilla now found renewed admiration for Catherine. The narrative of ambition was replaced by one of destiny. Headlines that once questioned her motives now hailed her composure. The phrase, "the people's balance," began trending, a tribute to her calm in chaos. Even critics, hardened by scandal fatigue, admitted that Catherine had done what no royal figure had managed in years. She made the monarchy feel human again. Camilla, meanwhile, withdrew from public life entirely. Official statements cited health and privacy. but those close to her spoke of heartbreak, exhaustion, and a sense of profound isolation. For a woman once surrounded by power, the silence was deafening. And yet, within that silence, there was dignity, a quiet acceptance that her chapter in history had come to its inevitable close. By month's end, the monarchy's approval rating began to stabilize. The institution had survived, though not without scars. The nation had been shaken, but it had not turned away. The king, once accused of weakness, now stood as a man who had made an impossible choice and endured its price. In his first address since the ordeal, Charles stood before the world and spoke only 12 words that would define his reign. "Every crown bears its cost, and this one has been paid in full." The audience fell silent. They understood. And as the sun set on a divided kingdom, one truth remained unshakable. The order had changed not just the palace, but the future. Weeks later, the world would give it a name: the Dawn Order. Historians would debate its motives. Analysts would question its legality. The tabloids, desperate for drama, would twist it into a saga of betrayal and redemption. But for those who lived it, for those inside those echoing halls, there was no debate. It was the day love surrendered to duty. The day a king, once torn between heart and heritage, chose the crown over comfort. King Charles had not destroyed his monarchy. He had reforged it, in pain, in sacrifice, and in purpose. In the aftermath, the rhythm of royal life resumed, but nothing was as it had been. Catherine, now the de facto face of the monarchy, assumed control of key engagements. Her presence carried both serenity and strength, her words measured but full of quiet conviction. Each appearance reminded the public why she had become the steady hand guiding a fragile institution. She did not claim the throne, but she held the nation's trust, and in the end, that was the real crown. Behind her calm smile, however, lay an unspoken understanding. Every act of grace came at a cost. Charles's health, already waning, began to decline under the weight of consequence. The sleepless nights, the moral turmoil, the emotional isolation, it all began to show. Yet he refused sympathy. To those who asked, he merely said, "Every crown is heavy, but some must wear it longer than they wish." His sister Anne became his quiet anchor, stepping into an unspoken advisory role. While others saw a fading monarch, Anne saw a man who had carried out his duty to the very end, even when it broke him. Her devotion to the crown never wavered, though even she admitted privately that this family has paid too dearly for its endurance. Camilla, once the lightning rod of controversy, disappeared from public life. No press statements, no appearances, no retaliation. Her silence became her loudest statement. It was neither surrender nor defeat, it was withdrawal, the final act of a woman who understood that words, now, could only wound further. The world speculated endlessly about her whereabouts, her condition, her thoughts, but she remained, as ever, a mystery. Then came William. In a speech that silenced the noise of speculation, he reminded the nation and the world that unity, not division, was the crown's truest inheritance. "We have not lost our way," he declared. "We have merely learned what it costs to stand together." It was a moment that transcended scandal. For the first time in months, the royal family stood as one, fractured, scarred, but still standing. Global media shifted its tone. What began as chaos was reframed as rebirth. "Monarchy reborn under crisis," one headline read. Another simply said, "The dawn after the storm." The narrative of collapse had transformed into one of survival. The monarchy had been wounded, but in its suffering, it had found something purer, something almost human. As the weeks turned to months, the storm began to fade from memory, but its lesson remained. Power, the monarchy learned, was not eternal, it was borrowed. It belonged not to bloodlines, but to the people who believed in them. And in that belief lay both the monarchy's strength and its fragility. And as Britain slept, with the crown once again at peace but forever changed, one phrase still echoed through the marble halls of Buckingham Palace: "This ends now."